You're listening to Discover Stories on Reimagine Radio, brought to you by the Vancouver Adapted Music Society. To learn more about accessible music programs and opportunities, please visit our website at VAMS.org. That's www.vams.org. Now let's get into today's episode. So now moving on to, your business. So what inspired you to launch, the accessible travel consulting division of ICAN Resource Group? What need did you see in the travel industry?
Well, I should start with, I've been traveling for many years. I think my first international trip was in 2005, and from day one, I realized that there are a number of barriers for people with disabilities, and not to say that it's impossible to travel in a wheelchair or on a ventilator, but it's definitely more challenging. And over the years, I've found different tips and tricks that have helped me along the way. And so I thought, why not share some of this lived experience and hopefully encourage others who might be a little bit apprehensive to travel, or frankly think that it's not possible, to show them that, yes, you can do it. It does take a little bit more work, more planning for sure, but it's possible and extremely enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And you're kind of paving that way for people who don't think it's a possibility. That's amazing. So what are some common challenges that people with disabilities face when traveling, and how does ICAN Resource Group help overcome them?
Well, traveling by plane is always, for me at least, the most intimidating part of a trip. And so I really try to share my knowledge of how I keep my wheelchair safe, and how to bring all of my medical equipment on the airplane. And I think so that's a big part of it. Also, there are things that I've come across, and many others, I'm sure. For example, I wanted to take a train across Canada, and I was extremely excited, and I went through all the paperwork, and then finally, just before purchasing my tickets, I realized that my wheelchair is physically too wide to fit on the train. So that was a huge disappointment. And I really try to share that knowledge with people, and try and problem solve. Maybe renting a manual wheelchair is an option for that person, so that they can take that trip. So I think, working through case by case, really identifying where the barriers are and trying to find solutions.
Wow. And did you try to rent a manual chair for that train, or?
Not yet, but I am seriously considering it, because it's always been a dream of mine to take a train across Canada. I have, though, a few years ago, I took a train through Europe and the UK, and that was absolutely incredible. So I've been able to experience it just in another continent. So,
I mean, Europe's beautiful, but you still want to do it in Canada for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so based on your experience, what are some of the most accessible travel destinations, and what are some that kind of still need more work to do?
Well, a few years ago, just before the pandemic, I went to Southeast Asia, and Japan was surprisingly very accessible. And I say that because in the very beginning, I was working with a travel agency. I'm not going to name any names here, but their accessibility consultant came to me and said, "Listen, I hate to tell you this, but Tokyo is not wheelchair friendly, and so I highly recommend not visiting there." And that was hard to hear, but I'm a pretty stubborn individual, and so I decided to push through. And shockingly, Japan, well, Tokyo specifically, it is one of the most accessible places I've been to. So yeah, that was great. Particularly their training system is wonderful, and the service, like you're treated like royalty.
Wow.
As somebody with a disability in the train station. So yeah, Japan, Tokyo for sure. Also, I am in the middle of planning a trip to Dubai for the end of this year, and I haven't been there yet. But from the research I've done, Dubai seems to be very accessible as well. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Wow. I'm curious, why Dubai?
Well, initially, I was hoping to go to Egypt because I've always been a fan of archaeology, and I've just always wanted to see the pyramids. But through research, I found that yes, I would be able to um, to fly to Cairo. That's not an issue, and getting around would be moderately accessible. But after looking at street views and reviews and lots of YouTube videos, I find that it probably would be less enjoyable for me as I would hope. Particularly how bumpy it is around the pyramids. I don't, and I would love, my dream would be to actually go into some ruins, and that's just not realistic in my wheelchair. So I had a little bit of a change of heart and thought, where else have I always wanted to be that is uh, in that general part of the world, but also more modern. And of course, Dubai is a taste of the future.
Yeah.
So that's the plan.
Well, that sounds amazing. And hopefully, with our future technology advancements, there's wheelchairs that are available that makes the rocky and unstable roads and pavement feel like you're rolling on like clouds. Hopefully.
Yes, I hope so too.
Well, so our listeners do know that Tokyo and Japan are the two places, and hopefully Dubai are some accessible travel destinations.
Yes.
Awesome. So what are some key tips and recommendations you would give to someone with a disability who's planning a trip?
Preparation is key. I think but for me, I find that for a large trip, I usually start planning at least 6 months in advance, because I want to make the most of it. Like many of these places, I probably won't visit again. And so I want to ensure that I'm seeing and experiencing everything I can for the most part. And so doing a ton of research, and that can be like visiting websites, Facebook groups, YouTube videos, Google Street View, just really painting a picture of what to expect and how I will navigate it, like what services are available, how is the public transit, what do the sidewalks look like, For example, when I was in Cambodia, I realized that there were no public taxis
Mm,
or anything of that nature that my power wheelchair would fit into. And so I really had to make sure that everything I wanted to see was in walking distance of the hotel. And so it would have been a very disappointing trip if I had to walk a half hour or 45 minutes each way just to go visit the attractions I
mm,
wanted to see. So planning for sure. And with that, contacting the airline well in advance, making sure they are absolutely clear what your needs are, what equipment you're bringing, so that there aren't any surprises on the day of. Because years ago when I first traveled, there were lots of surprises. I showed up at the airport one time and they asked me to take, I think it was 50 or 100 pounds off my wheelchair, and I was trying to figure out like, well, if I take the tires off and the batteries, like how am I going to make this work?
oh my
And
goodness.
luckily there was some miscommunication, and the person that gave me that direction was completely incorrect, and I didn't have to remove anything off my wheelchair. But just knowing in advance what your rights are, what you're able to do, I think that really makes it a more enjoyable experience,
Mm,
because at the end of the day, holidays are supposed to be fun. They're
mm-hmm,
not supposed to be stressful. And sure, it's important to be flexible because things do happen that are out of your control.
mm-hmm.
But at least if you have a general understanding of what the game plan is, then I find that makes it such a better experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So plan in advance
Yes.
for everything. Um, Typically, how long do you go like away um, on these vacations?
It depends. If I'm flying somewhere, I usually like to go for at least 7 to 10 days, preferably longer. Some of my trips have been away for 3 or 4 weeks, just because it is such a large trip. That, for example, when I was in Southeast Asia, we went to Japan, Thailand, and Cambodia, and
Wow.
that would have been too rushed to be hopping from country to country every couple of days. So
Mhm.
that was a longer trip. And I also find that it's uh it's exhausting traveling, especially if you're on a 10-hour flight, or Dubai, for
Mhm.
example, is a 15-hour flight.
Oh, wow.
But I know it's going to take me a day or two to recover, and if something does happen, like my luggage is misplaced, or some unforeseeable incident, then it's really important to have a couple days to be able to regroup and strategize how to proceed.
Mhm.
Um, a good example of that is a couple years ago, I was in London, England, and the first night that we arrived, my wheelchair charger exploded. And,
Oh
and so I
no.
spent the next day frantically phoning around to every wheelchair repair shop in London to try and find a new battery charger. And luckily we were able to, but that took an entire day out of
Mm,
our adventure.
right. So it's always good to leave some extra days to, one, recover, and two, hopefully nothing goes wrong, but you have that, that
Yeah.
room there.
Yes.
So where do you see ICAN Resource Group Travel Consulting Division in the future? Are there any upcoming projects or initiatives you're excited about?
Yes. Well, actually, I'm working with technology for living, for 3 in-person events that will be taking place this summer on Vancouver Island. The project is called Diverse Destinations. We received some funding from the Victoria Foundation to offer these programs. So I'm really excited to be able to share photos and stories and also answer questions in person that people might have about how to travel for their own adventures. So stay tuned. More information will be on ICAN's website and also Technology for Living's social media pages.
Okay, awesome. And we will link those in the episode details so people can find them. And then, yeah, is there anything else you want to kind of talk about? We kind of ripped through all the questions I had for you, so we can talk about anything. The floor is open.
I'm good. I think, well, I just want to thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. This was so much fun, and I hope that the listeners learned a thing or two. And I definitely encourage you to visit the Technology for Living website and ICAN Resource website because there's always really exciting things happening.
Awesome. No, thank you for coming and joining me today. And definitely, I'm sure the listeners will find this really informative and hopefully they'll find ways to, travel. And that really inspired me. I'm like, I'm always pushing off traveling and I'm like, I don't really have much barriers other than me being lazy about it. So I should make more of an effort to do so.
Yeah, I honestly think everybody should travel at some point in their life because it can be really easy to, I think, live in a bit of a bubble. And traveling is such a learning experience. I love just being around other cultures and learning how other people live their lives. And the more I travel, the more humble I become. And I just think it's such a positive experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely gives you a different perspective on life. And yeah, and you're right. We have this like bubble that we live in North America, especially. So stepping outside of like the Western culture, it's like definitely a culture shock for sure. Thanks for tuning in to Discover Stories on Reimagine Radio. If you enjoy our content, please support us by subscribing to the YouTube channel or following us on Spotify. See you in the next episode.